Welcome to Paranormal UK Radio with your hosts, Irene Allen Block and Mark Johnson.
Welcome to Paranormal UK Radio, the flagship show on the Paranormal UK Radio network. I'm your host, Irene Allen Block, and once again tonight I am with Mark Johnson, my co-host.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Very proud of you, thank you.
I only made 3 false starts today.
That's quite all right.
We
wouldn't have you any other way.
No, well, this is it. This is what it's all about, isn't it? Messing up, you know?
Yep. Keeps life interesting. Just shows everybody we're only human.
Yeah, but...
Well, I still don't know about you, but...
Oh, all right then. Okay, but I won't have to worry about that after next week, will I? Because you'll be doing it all.
Yep. Well, no, not me doing it all. Next week when you're lounging by the pool or sitting in the piazza drinking your Prosecco...
Prosecco or Poloni Beera or whatever.
The next 2 weeks, I'll be joined by Andy Mercer.
That's right.
Transatlantic Para Radio. And so he'll be sitting in as a co-host with me co-hosting and you not there. And we got a couple of great shows lined up. So you'll be relaxing in Italy and the show will still go on.
Yeah. The show will go on. Our guest tonight is Chris Halton from Haunted Earth, and he's recently been out in Italy, Venice, near Venice at
Say it.
Poveglia Island.
Poveglia
Island, investigating. Hello, Chris.
Hi. To be honest with you, the G tends to throw a lot of English-speaking people. So a lot of people, including me, when I actually did my original intro on the island, I actually used the wrong pronunciation, so I had to correct it. So, yeah, it's easily done. And, of course, when you do it, people that speak the native language, they think, oh, my God, he's pronounced the island. and you get torn to pieces. No, well, not quite, actually, because I found the whole experience and the people I met out there to be absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, well, I should know better because I spend so much time in Italy, you know, but obviously everyone makes mistakes.
Well, you know what the problem is?
I hear so many people use the word Poveglia that it just sticks with you, you know?
And that's mostly the Americans. You want to know what the problem is with the Italians? They speak Italian.
Oh, gosh.
Well, actually, that's not actually strictly correct, because people that live in Venice, they speak a variant of Italian. Venetian, yeah. And that also goes for a number of areas across the country where they speak variation.
Sicilian.
And they're very proud.
Neapolitan.
Yeah, they're very proud of their linguistic and cultural differences.
That's right, they are. They definitely are. I used to know a family out there. Well, I still do know the family out there. And one of the daughter-in-laws came from Milan, and the mother from Naples. She couldn't understand a word she was saying.
Yeah, because there, as it was pointed out to me, there are a number of words which do not translate into Italian, and these words are particularly local to that particular area, which is Venezia as they call it, or Venezia, which is the correct pronunciation for Venice. And I must admit, when I went out there, I've always loved Venice. It's a kind of city that ticks all the boxes for its architecture, its mixture of blends of architecture, its history, its achievements, and to think that city was founded by a group of survivors, I believe, from Padua, that managed to flee the barbarians and get into the swamp, into the Laguna Venice, where they created this magnificent city, you know, obviously building on islands, connecting the islands together to become perhaps one of the most powerful Italian nation states in history.
They did, yeah, because there was 4 of them, weren't there? There was Genoa, there was the Amalfi, there was Pisa, and Venezia, yeah.
But I mean, they virtually took over the whole of the Adriatic, and they had trading routes through Marco Polo and others right across the known world into China and beyond. And so, as a people, they were highly influential. And of course, as far as the Roman Catholic Church was concerned, they were a powerful nation state that the church could call upon to do their dirty work on occasions, because Constantinople, which is today Istanbul, was sacked by pirates, mercenaries who were hired from Venice.
Were they?
Yep.
No, I didn't. That's one I didn't know. That's one I didn't know.
I went to a major art exhibition in Venice about 7 years ago, and there were cut up pieces of gold which were actually gold plate, which had been looted from Constantinople when the city was attacked and burnt. And in effect, what they did, they weakened Constantinople, because it was regarded as the bastion of defense against the more violent Arab states. And of course, it weakened them to such a degree that the modern day Turks, as they are, were able to sweep from North Africa into one part of Europe, which is today Istanbul and the land surrounding it. Yeah.
Well, I've got friends that live up near Venice, and I keep promising to visit them up there. But they also, every summer, travel down to Amalfi on the southern coast where I go, and I always see them there. But, I keep saying to myself, I'm going to see them up there because I want to pop over and see Venice. So what did you make of Venice? Did you find Venice had an atmosphere of the paranormal? Should I say?
Yeah, you didn't appreciate it during the day, but certainly late at night, wandering down the narrow streets, you could certainly pick up the vibes and you could feel it. And it's the only time that I felt the city return back to its truly natural state in a spiritual sense. I mean, the problem with Venice today, there are many, many issues, but the biggest being too much tourism, which has caused, and also they removed the cap on rent. So the native Venetians were lucky to for a period of time by law to have their rents capped, so they didn't pay exorbitant prices. But then you see, of course, a lot of greedy people decided that they can make a lot more money because tourism was catching on in a big way. So they removed this law, and it allowed them to raise the rents, force out the tenants, and a lot of these properties are now hotels, or they're B&Bs, or even Airbnbs. And of course, it's got to the point now in terms of value that the only people that can afford to live there are very rich people, and mostly foreigners. So the native Venetians, if you like, have been forced to the suburbs of the city, and many have fled back onto the mainland. So unless that's reversed, what is Venice? And at the end of the day, every nation, despite what some people think, once you remove the people from that nation, it's no longer what it once represented. And if you take all the Venetians out of Venice, it's no longer Venice. It becomes a theme park. And sadly, that's what's happening to the city. And it's quite saddening, actually. It does sadden me deeply, because it's such a beautiful place, and its architecture and its history, and it's certainly, if you like, the pulse of Italy, the soul of Italy, I think, is Venice.
Yeah.
Well, the argument.
It's such a shame.
The argument could also be said that the same thing has currently happened to Great Britain right now, but that's another conversation.
Yeah, we won't get into politics. I'm sick of politics. I'm sick of people having opinions about politics. So, yeah, it's a big worry about what's happening to Venice, and of course the other damage that's being caused to the city, apart from the tidal issues they have in the winter time, are the big cruise ships which are allowed to berth there. They create giant bow waves. And these bow waves are actually damaging the fabric of the city. Sorry,
Chris, do they actually moor at Venice, or do they moor over by Lido di Jesolo?
Well, I don't know where they actually berth within Venice, but when I went to the one part of Venice is the bus park, where you can catch a train and all the rest of it. So it's a sliver of the mainland. And from there you can see all the ships. And I counted up 4 giant cruise ships. And when you think of how many people per ship there are, and all those people when the ship is disemboweled every day and all these people come ashore, it creates bigger problems. And what some of the Venetians explained to me, they have water buses. And sometimes they can't get to work because the boats are full of tourists. And it's not just a seasonal problem, it's a year-long problem, because in the summer you get a lot of European and American and Japanese tourists. They tend to go during the summer months. And in the winter, when I first went to Venice, the city was filled with Chinese tourists. So it's a constant turnover of people. And it's creating a lot of problems there for the people that live in Venice. And so it becomes a struggle. And some Venetians now want either complete independence from Italy, they want to return back to the nation state, or they want to work in an alliance with the Italian government. But, you know, all these problems could be cured at a stroke. There were 2 failing banks in Venice, and they were bailed out to the tune of 7.4 billion. Now, that 7.4 billion of euros could have been used to provide cheap housing for Venetians to get them to return to their motherland. But of course, the money was used instead to bail out banks, which should have been allowed to fail. And at least then it would have reestablished, if you like, a new momentum for the future of the city, which sadly, of course, is in recession. And if you wander around Venice, it just feels like a giant theme park. There are people there that have absolutely no interest in the history of the city, absolutely zero interest in Italian culture. It's just a place on their bucket list where they can get a photograph standing next to the Rialto Bridge, for example, or in St. Mark's Square, where the majority seem to congregate. And it is such a tragedy, it really is.
Yeah, it is. Definitely is.
But anyway, you want to know about my exploits on Poveglia.
Yeah, I do. But first of all, I want to know, how long did you actually stay in Venice before you went over to Poveglia?
Oh, we originally we travelled over on the Tuesday. We were going to go on the Wednesday, but the weather forecast was absolutely abysmal. There were heavy rain and winds. And I must admit, for one evening in Venice, it felt like being back in England. It was wet, windy and cold. But by Thursday, it completely changed and it became very hot and sunny. It was beautiful. And so we were there a couple of days before we travelled out onto the island. And fortunately, when we first went across, the boat that took us over was, if you like, more or less a dinghy with an outboard motor, which was perfect for me because it allowed me to film going down the canals, across the lagoon into the Adriatic and towards Poveglia, which is just a few miles off the coast of the Lido, which is another beautiful part of the Venetian lagoon.
Okay, and when you first stepped ashore on the island, what did you feel, or what did you think? What was your first thoughts?
My first impressions were why did they put all that scaffolding up around the buildings and just abandon it? And of course, when you listen to local wives' tales, it's because the Italian workers, after putting up the scaffolding, they were so terrified they fled. In reality, they put the scaffolding up, and then the Italian government decided that the money could be better used elsewhere. And so the project was abandoned, and so was the island. So my immediate impressions were the dilapidated state of the place. And another curiosity, which is perhaps of more minor insignificance, was the fact there were so many fishing nets that had just been dropped on the quay side. And that was a problem, especially carrying the equipment over these nets, because you were constantly tripping over. And of course, the surrounding buildings were completely covered in gorse and undergrowth. And so
it was well overgrown then.
Oh, it was a nightmare. And a majority of buildings were inaccessible through neglect and, of course, through vandalism. And there was a lot of vandalism there. And we weren't able to get into the tower of the church, which still exists there, because all exits were just completely filled with rubble and pieces of broken furniture. And so it was such a tragedy because these buildings were quite beautiful. And if they were restored and brought back, they could be used for a number of purposes, which would benefit the people of Venice. And particularly one part of the island, where the ashes of the dead, 161,000 people believed to have been deposited there. That particular piece of land, and this is what the Italians want, the Venetians want, they want that turned into a nature reserve. And this would be a wonderful idea. You've got to, when you go to Venice, you've got to remove from your brain all concept of ordinary modern life, because nobody travels by car. Everybody travels by boat. And so there was a steady stream of boats of visitors that were coming to the island during the day. So it wasn't as isolated and as lonely as people tend to make out. There were quite a number of people coming there, and particularly at night, even when we were there, a group of kids turned up, a group of 16-year-olds in 2 boats, and they were making a hell of a noise. So I went out with my man in the hat, and I got my flashlight and I placed it under my chin, and I've never seen so many people run for their lives back to their boats.
You scared the living daylights out of them.
Actually, I went over to them, and most Italians you speak to speak some competency of English, and these kids could speak English quite well. So I went over to them and I laughed and joked with them. I said, "I'm only playing with you," and I explained what I was doing, because they said they'd come there for ghost hunting, but basically they'd gone there for thrill seeking, and they left, and we were able to continue the investigation. But the daytime was particularly interesting, because wandering around the outskirts at the back of the buildings, I never felt anything negative whatsoever inside the buildings. I felt a very deep sadness. Whether that was something that I was picking up, which was spiritual, or whether it was my own feelings about the place, I can't say. But when I went around the back, I felt an intense evil there. Oh, it was very thick and very heavy. It was an island of. It came across to me an island of death in many different ways. So I found loads and loads of dead rabbits, which had been killed by rats. But people that hadn't been to the island assured me that it wasn't rats, it was something else. It was people doing it for black magic rituals and other such nonsense. But there is a large rat population, and also the gulls, the huge gulls they have in Venice, and the gulls are also attacking the rabbits too. And these were formerly domesticated rabbits, which and they weren't wild rabbits. They were domesticated rabbits that had gone wild, which I think have probably been released there when the hospital closed in 1969. Obviously, no one could have been bothered to take them back with them, and so the rabbits were allowed to roam. And so the most prominent colours were black, brown and grey. And of course, the black ones were mostly the dead ones, because their colour scheme doesn't match the undergrowth too well, and so they become victim to the predators. But wandering around, as I say, in that area, when you're seeing all these dead rabbits, and there's this horrible pervasive atmosphere of evil, and you can sense it. And another weird sensation, and again, people thought, well, this is nonsense, but you really need to be there to experience it. You could easily become lost. It's only a small island, but wandering around the back, I, on 2 occasions, spent at least 20 minutes trying to find my way out. It was just weird. And sometimes we'll step into a building at one side of the island buildings, and then we'll find ourselves literally stepping out much further down in another part. It was bizarre. And so, yes, there is something very weird about the island. No two ways about it. I would certainly say it deserves its reputation to some degree, but I can honestly say that during the night investigation, I was wandering around on my own in those buildings and going back to our control point without any difficulty whatsoever. I didn't feel intimidated. I didn't feel threatened by anything, but there was no way I was going to wander around the back, because A, it was too dangerous because of the undergrowth, because of the collapsed buildings, and of course this very, very heavy sense of evil. And it was
you talked about where the ashes had actually been scattered. Was that at the back? Because there's also 2 plague burial pits. somewhere on the island, isn't there? According to what I read, there was 100,000 people thrown into them.
I think there's a confusion there, because I did some research on that, and the series of photographs which showed you a plague pit that had been exposed, and the attributes were for Pavelia, when in fact it was another island where people were buried in plague pits. What they did on Pavelia, people were cremated and their ashes were taken. The cremation point was, I believe, I'm not sure whether I'm getting my north and south mixed up, but the island's split into two. It's bisected with a canal.
Yeah, that's right, and a bridge, isn't it?
Is where they carried out the cremations, and the other side of the island is where they deposited the ashes of the dead. And you can see the ash in the soil. It looks almost volcanic in some areas. You wander through there and you can see this ash, this grey-brown ash. But the other thing that struck me, and it was sad, was the fact that people had been there for a picnic, and they had literally abandoned all their plastic plates and cutlery and barbecue, just and just walked off and left it.
That area is a graveyard, isn't it?
Yeah, but unfortunately,
no respect whatsoever.
Nobody shares the same sentiments as others, unfortunately. And some people that go there, whether they are local or whether they are foreigners, they go there they have no reverence or respect for the site. Other people that go there, foreigners and locals, have a lot of respect for the site. So it's just pot luck. I mean, I met a number of people there, young Italians, who were showing a great deal of respect for the site. But I can imagine on past occasions they've had some pretty terrible events that have taken place there, with people damaging the buildings, starting fires and all kinds of mayhem. But I certainly can rule out black magic worship. I never found any indicators of that at all.
So there wasn't?
I didn't find anything like that. I mean, you can find symbology spray painted on the wall, but then you can also find obscene paintings sprayed on the wall. But it doesn't mean to say the island was used for sex orgies. You know, it's just people being people. Just it's vandalism, it's graffiti. But I never found any physical evidence of black magic worship. None at all.
Okay. And what about the negative energy at the back? What sort of feelings did that give you?
The energy that I felt at the back it wasn't a number, it was one person. And it was somebody who was very, very disturbed. And of course, if it goes without saying, I mean, it
was an asylum,
to be an asylum. But no, this energy was very, very disturbed. And it felt quite malevolent. And I certainly wouldn't want to wander around there on my own at night. And of course, you've got to be careful because there's so much rubble and debris lying across the site. And also holes, drains that have had their covers removed. It would be so very easy for anyone to wander through there and seriously injure themselves.
Okay, yeah. Yeah,
but it does freak people out. I mean, the last.
And also, there's the danger of rubble falling down on you.
Yeah, well, yeah, the buildings are the majority of the buildings are too dangerous now to wander through. And certainly from Ghost Adventures, when they were there, there's been a complete transition in the quality of the site in terms of safety. A lot of places they were wandering through were completely inaccessible, where the buildings, the roofs have collapsed. And so, and of course, it's just getting worse. And the longer you leave it, the worse it will get. And eventually, someone will step in and they would demolish those buildings, which would be a tragedy. And they would be replaced and probably build a hotel, as they have done on one of the islands. They've turned it into a giant hotel. I believe it's owned by an American chain. And that, to me, is a kind of perversity, because I think those islands should
sacrilege, isn't it?
Yeah, they should be respected, and they should be used by the Venetians and not used as a hub for tourism, and that's what they've become. But coming back to the point I'm making about that malevolence that I felt, I think it could be quite dangerous. I mean, last year, I believe 8 Americans got someone to take them to the island. They made a pre-arrangement to pick them up in the morning. and by about midnight, they had actually put out a distress call, and they had to be rescued by the Italian Fire Brigade from Venice. So it was a boat. They had to send a boat out to rescue them and bring them off the island. I found that quite amusing because I never felt anything like that. Now, another interesting factor again, at the end of the investigation, I was sat on the quay waiting for our boat to pick us up. And a mist came out of the broken windows and completely enveloped us. I could see it all around Mark, and I could see it on myself, but I couldn't. But Mark could not see it. Only I could see it, and it was this very thick, heavy mist, and he became opaque. I could barely see him, and I'm telling him this, and he couldn't see a thing. And immediately, this was just literally a few minutes before the boat picked us up, and when the boat started to turn into the harbour, the mist rushed straight back into the building. It was. I think they came out to
say goodbye. Yeah, I
because none of us showed any form of disrespect. I never do when I go to these places, and I think they came out just to say goodbye, to make sure we got off okay. And once they saw the boat coming, they went back inside the building. That was bizarre, but it was it's a 40-minute boat ride to get out there, but on the return boat we were on a very powerful launch. The Venetians build some very fine launches, and this launch that we were on had these huge twin inboard engines, like power jets, and the boat just zipped back. And the beauty of it was it could stop right outside our hotel, like a car pulling up outside a hotel, but it's a boat that pulls outside the hotel. And the concierge came out and gave a hand and removed all our bits and pieces, and we were able to return to our hotel room. So, it was a wonderful experience. I loved every moment of it. But the one thing I'll have for Poveglia is a tremendous sadness for the place, because I think it could be used for much better purposes than allowing it to devolve into what.
Well, it's more than likely going to be what you said. The building was actually built in 1922, the actual asylum. And it's more than likely that they're going to let it become so decrepit that it's going to have to be pulled down, and they can put the hotel there. Because look how many beautiful asylums in this country, going right back into the 1800s, maybe, I don't know any earlier, but going back into the 1800s, have been absolutely pulled down, and they've built housing estates on them.
Yeah, I think they were.
Cane Hill Hospital, for a start. There was one in Surrey, Cane Hill Hospital. I used to go there to visit people. Just as a volunteer visitor, and it was beautiful.
I used to take people to these hospitals because I was a police officer, and on occasions some people were sectioned and we had to take them to the hospitals. I think in a way, I mean, the argument was that by banging, by literally imprisoning people in these hospitals, you were stopping them from any opportunity to return to normalcy, to be able to be returned back to society. But the truth of the matter is, with some of these poor people, they have literally gone from a secure building where they had 3 meals a day and all their comforts were taken care of, and literally dumped onto the street.
And fend for themselves.
Yeah, and I noticed that when I wandered around Chicago, how many people that were mentally ill, that were sleeping rough on the street. And I've always said that you can measure any society by the way it treats its people, its poor. And to see all those people, both black, white, male and female, sleeping rough on the street, it was a depressing sight. And realizing that a lot of those people should have been looked after in some kind of care. I mean, the concept of asylums, if we go back to that, in the past were quite cruel because they carried out a number of experiments on people to try and remove. I used to give them electric shock treatment and all kinds of therapies.
Well, many of them weren't even mentally ill in there, were they? Some had nervous breakdowns, some were put in by the husband.
Yeah, there was another way, of course. If you were standing in line to succeed to an estate, and you had a brother or sister in front of you, and you paid 2 doctors, you could have that person consigned to a mental hospital, and all your problems were over.
Mm.
And
Yeah, there was a member of the royal family in one in Wallingham.
I don't know about that, but I do know that a lot of people that went there, some of those people should have some kind of care by the state, and not just being abandoned onto the street where they are today. And it's a real tragedy, and it breaks my heart to see people like that. And I also saw in Venice a lot of mentally ill people, but they weren't Venetians. They were North Africans, and they were begging, and they may have had drug dependency issues or whatever. But, to take people across and then just dump them in the city to fend for themselves, begging for money to buy, which no doubt would probably be used for whatever habits they have, is a tragedy in itself, and that also broke my heart to see it. I despair how society treats people. I really do, regardless of where they're from and who they are. It certainly breaks my heart to see it, and unfortunately, it's a problem that's getting worse. There's so many people now sleeping rough on the streets, and in this country, we have. I think it's is it 2 or 3 million people now, maybe more, are wholly dependent, young families, wholly dependent on food banks.
That's right. Yeah. You wouldn't believe it, would you?
It's
in this
terrible.
day and age, food banks.
But and again, we won't get political. It's just that it's this problem or this common issue now where let's just open the borders and welcome immigrants. We have to be, kind-hearted and help them. And yet this is what happens to so many of them. They come in and they don't really have anything, nothing, no jobs, no nothing. They wind up on the system. They wind up on the streets.
I just think people are being abused. And I think a lot of those people are being abused. And it breaks my heart to see it. And I'm not talking about, Islamic extremism. I'm talking about ordinary people who have got life issues.
Right. That's what I meant. Yes. And, a lot of people are being shuffled around the globe right now, out of their own countries. And it's getting really difficult for these home countries, like Italy and in Venice and these other places, to take care of their people. Especially if other people are flooding in, and
it's unfortunately it's a problem that for which there doesn't appear to be a willing solution by governments to deal with. Because again, you could argue that perhaps these people are being used as cheap labour, and that again is another abuse which I'm opposed to. The whole thing.
We know that happens.
The whole thing is tragic.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, to return to the paranormal.
Oh, now on the one question I want to ask.
To set the world to rights, but I am with mental hospitals and places like that. I think that Pavelia. I think the reason they built the hospital there, as they did on a number of other islands, they built hospitals as well, was to, if you like, it could be argued that these people were being dumped there, so they were a problem that was not in plain sight anymore. And of course, historically, if you look back into the past on hospitals, as I pointed out earlier, that people were being experimented upon by some crazy doctors themselves. And there's a legend
at the island.
Pavelia. Well, not just at Pavelia, but elsewhere.
Yeah.
I think that if people are taken out of plain sight, and there is nobody there, should we say, from the outside looking inside, all kinds of abuse could take place. And I have no doubt on Pavelia that actually happened in the past. I know there was a story about the mad doctor who experimented on his patients.
I was going to ask you about that one.
But there is a big problem there. I'm a researcher and historian, and if I research something, if someone says to me, blah, 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 I can only accept that on face value unless I have reference points that I can actually draw back to. So if someone said to me there was a mad doctor on the island that experimented on his patients and he went mad and climbed up into the bell tower and fell, and then he was surrounded by mist. Now, I found that part quite intriguing because I saw that mist. Okay, but if they said it was Doctor blah blah blah, and I could find a record for this doctor, then I could believe it. But I could find no references anywhere on the internet to the identity of this doctor. And I think that to a degree that some of the stories that have been distributed about Pavelia, if you like, are confection to keep people away from the island. I think some of the stories were created to scare people off so people wouldn't go there.
Well, there's also the when you're talking about they're dumped on these islands, it also makes it very difficult for people to escape off these islands because how long of a boat ride is it to get out to the island?
Well, I think you could swim to the mainland, or to Lido, which is not the mainland, it's another island. I think you could probably swim there in about an hour, but that depends on the tide as well. And also parts of the lagoon are incredibly shallow. That's why when you go through the lagoon, there are poles which actually mark the highway, and you have to stick within those poles. If you deviate outside of them, and also at certain times of the day, you can't go through there at certain points because it is a tidal estuary, you could easily become stuck on the mud. So there are a number of factors there that would perhaps prevent people from escaping from the island, but I don't think that was a feature that was put, that was, if you like, written into the idea of putting a hospital there. I just think it was the expedience of taking people away from mainstream population and burying them away in the way that they did on these islands. But then on the other side of the coin, if you can look at it from a different perspective, these people, by not actually living on the mainland with all the problems and issues associated with living on the mainland, we're living on this island. And it's not a huge island, but it's big enough you could spend, it took about half an hour to wander around it. It's big enough to wander around on a daily basis, and you could grow vegetables there and keep pet rabbits or whatever the case may be. It could also be quite an idyllic life away from the pressures of modern society. So, yeah, there are plus factors as well as negative ones too. But I think all that added to the history also with the plague victims that have happened there. The words, what is the word for when they isolate people? Oh, gosh.
Quarantined.
Quarantine, yeah. Quaranta. It is actually a Venetian word, and that's where the word quarantine derived from. And I think the Venetians, although they did not understand the spread of diseases, they knew that if people were in contact with people carrying these diseases, they too could be infected and could die. So they weren't that stupid, the people of that period of history, going back to the medieval period, to realize that if they separated these people and put them into quarantine, it would save the majority, and that's what it did. But the trouble is, of course, is that some people that were taken there probably weren't infected with the plague, but they soon were once they arrived there. And also the people, those beaky doctors, those quacks that were there to try and cure them of their maladies, they too were later infected, and they too died there. And it's a kind of bizarre history that's attached to Pavelia, but it's a fascinating one, which one can understand why it has the legend as being the world's most haunted island. And another thought that crosses my mind, would I want to go back there again? And the answer to that would probably be no. I've done it. It's not that exciting a place, and it's quite a tragedy to look at it as it stands at the moment. I'd love to go back there if someone restored it and brought it back to life, but in its present state, I wouldn't want to go there. But Venice, of course, on the other hand, it's a city that I really do deeply love, and if I could afford to live there, I would. But unfortunately, the cost of buying housing there is just far too prohibitive, and it's out of the pocket of most people.
Yeah. How many nights did you actually spend on the island, Chris? We arrived in the afternoon and we left around about 2:00 in the morning. So you didn't sleep on it?
there was no point, because in all the investigations that I've done, what happens when you go into a location, it hits you as soon as you arrive, you can feel it. And as you're carrying out the investigation, the energy gets bigger and stronger and stronger. And then it reaches a point where it just suddenly switches off. It's used its energy, and it just kind of deflates and fades away. And quite clearly, after a period of time of being there, that energy had started to dissipate. And so it was really time to return. I certainly didn't want to spend the entire night on the island. And I certainly questioned some of the programs that have been there where they've claimed they stayed the entire night. If I was a filmmaker on a commercial filmmaker, I would probably film my crew leaving the island shortly after we arrived, to give the impression of being picked up in the morning, because I just couldn't see the point of staying there the entire night. But it was certainly an interesting experience. I think the daytime for me was certainly a lot more interesting than the night, but it was fun. It was great.
And who were you there with?
I went over with my American friend Mark.
Oh, did he enjoy it?
Yep, he loved it, and we both enjoyed it. It was great fun. We spent, as I say, a lot of time wandering around Venice itself before we went there and afterwards. The only thing that I'm sad about on this occasion, and it also happened on my first visit, I really do love classical music. I love all performing arts. I really have a strong interest. It means a great deal to me. And on both occasions, I was, if you like, I wasn't able to go to a concert or to any one of the venues there. So I'm hoping to go back again, perhaps next year, on a more cultural visit, to be able to visit some of the performances, particularly Vivaldi. They have an orchestra that dresses in 18th century period costume, playing on original instruments for that period.
I love all
Vivaldi's
that.
music, and I would love to go and listen to the Four Seasons Suite and other pieces. They also have a festival there as well, where people dress up in 18th century costume.
Yeah, I know about
rather
that.
ostentatious. I think that would probably be a little bit over the top for me, but I would certainly love to go back on the more cultural aspects of the city. I actually came across a guy playing a cello, and he was classically trained musician, and he was a busker. He played Air on the G string, and he played it so beautifully. I could have sat there for as long as he was there, listening to him play. He was such an accomplished musician. And you came across people like that in Venice, really, really, quality musicians, not buskers in the traditional sense, properly classically trained musicians. And all of that is part of the, if you like, the spectacle, which is Venice. And it's something that, again, I noticed the tourists, the bucket tourists, when this guy was playing, they were sniffing, putting their noses up at him and walking past. And I'm thinking, how ignorant can you get? This guy was playing to such an incredibly high standard, Air on the G string on the cello. It was absolutely sublime. It was wonderful. And when he finished, I praised this guy out of his socks. He was quite shocked. I thought he was absolutely amazing. I really, really enjoyed it. But to a lot of people, it's just a noise inconvenience that they wander past and ignore, which is such a tragedy. It really is. Because if you go to Venice, it's more than just visiting the place. It's also embracing the culture and the history of it too. And that is something which is remiss of many tourists. And if you like, it kind of cheapens the city to a degree. And I found that part very unpalatable and unpleasant. But
sounds like they were Americans.
Well, it wasn't just Americans. People rage on about Americans, but trust me, I've seen just as many ignorant Germans and Brits as well, who add to the mixture of that as well. And I met a few of those while I was there. And but it wasn't just one particular group of people. It ranges across a number of nations. And again, there were a lot of other people whose nationality was not known to me. And they were reacting to in the same way. The cultural side of it didn't have a strong appeal from the majority of tourists. It was standing outside in St Mark's Square, having your photograph taken next to the astronomical clock, or being on the Grand Canal, travelling up and down the canal in one of the gondolas. That's what it was all about. It was just it was a theme park mentality that people have. But there were others there that I saw that too were impressed, and you could see in their eyes how they felt about the city, which was exactly how I felt, and that was quite a warming moment. But unfortunately not for the majority. And now, of course, having done Pavelia, I'm now off to Romania.
Yeah, you are, aren't you?
Now that actually, I to be honest, with my work as it is, because of the style of my work, I don't over sensationalize anything that I do. I try to show things through my eyes, how I see them and feel them. I don't go there to scream, and I don't go there to pump up ghost stories as though, this is what's going to happen. I just embrace what's there and report on it accordingly. I can't get frightened if I'm not frightened, and I don't get frightened very easily. And so it is a struggle, I think. And so this entire visit to Romania is literally 80% raised from you, all those good people out there probably listening at this moment, who have either supported me on Patreon or they my DVDs.
Oh, great!
And so this trip is, if you like, to a degree is financed by all those fine people, and so what I'm hoping to do when I go to Romania is to, particularly in the forest, I'm particularly interested in the lights that have been seen.
Okay, before you carry on, Chris, I think you better explain a little bit about this forest for the people that don't know anything about it.
Well, it's actually not that big. A lot of people think it's a vast waving forest. It's just outside the city. There? It's just outside the city of Cluj-Napoca. It's around about 250 hectares. It's not that huge. There are a number of towers attached to it. There's a clearing where allegedly alien craft have been photographed in the 60s, I believe. And I've seen the photographs of that. And there is a clearing where nothing ever grows, which is nonsense because it's covered in grass, but there are no trees there, admittedly. The forest allegedly...
It's the Haya-Batu forest, isn't it?
Haya-Batu derives its name from, I believe, sheep farmers, because originally it was used by shepherds who used to take their sheep in there into the forest. But allegedly there was a slaughter of a large group of people during the medieval period, but I can find no direct references to that, to that attribution. There's also a number of towns of people that wander into the forest and are never seen again. There was one famous case of a 5-year-old little girl that disappeared into the forest, disappeared for years, and then some years later she emerged from the forest at the age she was when she disappeared, and her clothes were absolutely pristine. And so the suggestion is that either she's gone through a time loop, or because of the towers associated with aliens, that she had been picked up by aliens and kept in some kind of time storage and returned back to civilization, as it were, after they had taken her on board. But I'm very open-minded with regard to most of these stories. I can take them with a pinch of salt unless I can verify them. As I said to you earlier with Pavelia, with the ghostly mist that killed the mad director, I actually saw that mist. I actually saw a mist. Whether it was the same mist that killed him, I don't know. But I can find no reference, as I said, to reiterate as to how he died and who he was. But and there are certain tales there that I find particularly interesting, and that, as I say, revolves around the lights that have been seen. When Ghost Adventures went there some years ago, they actually captured one of the ghost lights within the forest, and it changed constantly from red to orange. and it appeared to react to their presence. So it appeared to be a sentient energy. Again, the argument there is this alien or is this spiritual or whatever? Also, people feeling nausea and sickness and weird feelings while they're there. I hope that doesn't happen to me. I don't mind feeling a little bit of the aura of the place, but I certainly don't want to be laid out with nausea. But again, that side of the stories associated with the forest are interesting. Whether or not I will see a UFO, that's extremely unlikely, but I'm certainly hopeful of seeing this light. And what I want to do is to be able to try and contact it, open up a line of communication.
I was going to ask you what sort of investigation you were going to do there. So
I've got
going to try and contact it.
I've got 3 friends coming with me who are Romanians. 2 are academics, but they're open-minded, and they want to. Again, you see, coming back to Italy again, I couldn't find any Italians who would come with me to the island overnight. They, because of the legends associated with it, or for whatever reasons, nobody wanted to go there.
Yeah,
and the same situation occurs generally with the forest. A lot of Romanians will not go into the forest at night. They're terrified of it. And so I'm going with 3 Romanians who are open-minded, and they want to go in there. They want to experience it. So
I'm being a bit naive here, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
Do they believe that there's vampires or anything in this forest?
No.
Oh,
No. In fact, if you joke, to be honest, with most, the problem with the vampires, the story of the vampires, obviously, if we go back to Count Dracula, is actually a corruption of an earlier true life story of Vlad the Impaler.
I know, yeah.
And he was a psychopath, but he was also a freedom fighter, and he's made an heroic stand against the invasion by the Turkish army. And of course, he treated his prisoners abominably. He had them put out on stakes. So blood and stakes again was associated with Count Dracula.
That's the name Impaler.
Yeah, but in reality, I've been to the one place where Count Dracula was born, and it wasn't in Romania. It was actually in St. Minchin's Church in Dublin, in the crypt.
No.
Yep.
You're joking.
I never knew that.
I didn't know that.
Bram Stoker, the famous author, went into the crypt, I believe, around about in the late 19th century, and he noticed explained something about the crypt there. It has a certain quality of chemical in the crypt, which was actually built by the Danes. So it's a very ancient crypt, and the church was built on top. It's a Protestant church built on top of this ancient crypt. Yeah. And because of the preservation qualities in the stone, it keeps it continuously airy and dry. The bodies don't rot away as they do in normal circumstances, as they would do anywhere else. And so what you have complete coffins rotting away gradually, and you can see bodies, skeletons, still with flesh attached to them, lying inside these coffins. And what Bram Stoker did, he wandered down there one day. He was obviously looking for a new angle for a story, and he saw all these desiccated bodies lying in their coffins, which are exactly in the same position that they were in then to this day. Mm-hmm. And there spawned the idea of Count Dracula. And so he did a bit of research on this idea of the living dead, and he learned of the legend of of Vlad the Impaler, or Vlad Pesces, I think his name is, and he based his story upon that and placed his story inside Romania. And so the Romanians are fully aware of this, of course. And of course, one can understand why Romanians get a little bit annoyed when people go there and start doing Count Dracula impersonations or making jokes about Count Dracula, because there's nothing at all associated with the legend or story of Count Dracula. It was a confection of the imagination of a brilliant writer, Bram Stoker, who spawned the idea of Count Dracula, place it all within Transylvania, and then, of course, brought the story over to England, to Whitby, where Dracula's body was brought over in a coffin. And, of course, Dracula could not stand the light of day, so he can only travel at night. And so this story about the vampire became, it went, if you like, to a degree, went from fiction to fact. And people today associate all of this with Romania. So it's nothing to do with that. And the problem is, when people start thinking in that way, they're ignoring the real history of the country. And I think that's what irritates people in Romania too. But obviously, from the tourism side, people capitalize on that. I think certain towns you can buy Count Dracula T-shirts and other such nonsense. But Dracula has really nothing to do with Transylvania. And
so Dracula's castle out there really is not Dracula's castle.
Well, no, Dracul. The problem is with his name. They wanted to give him a name, and they chose the name Dracul, and Dracul means lizard or snake or something.
Actually, dragon. The original, his father, Vlad Tepes's father, was the title of the dragon, which was Dracul. And him being he was Dracula, which is son of the dragon.
Exactly. So there is the legend of Dracula. So it's and again, these are all lovely stories, but when you confuse them when you confuse fact with fiction, it can be very irritating for people that have to live there with that kind of story. Bela Lugosi was a Hungarian stroke Romanian. A lot of Transylvanian people are partly or totally either Hungarian or Romanian or a mixture of both, because that part of Romania was once part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And so the actor Bela Lugosi, he was technically born in Romania, but that part of Romania upon which he was born in is actually now part of Hungary, would believe it or not. So the man who played first played Count Dracula, was actually from Romania.
So he had the accent right.
Yes, so his accent would have been absolutely spot on. And of course, when you go to that part of Romania as opposed to the southern part, and if you like, Romania is two countries, Transylvania and the rest of the country as Romania. So when you go to Transylvania, the architecture is different to that you find in the south. It has more of a Germanic flair to it, theme to it. And certainly with regard to a number of the properties built in the 17th and 18th centuries and onwards, when you look at these old buildings, you can see that influence in the architecture very, very strongly. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, wherever they built, they built in a particular style. When I went to Trieste, which is now part of Italy, which used to be part of Slovenia, that was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire because they absorbed the Venetian Empire. And the buildings reflect the same style of architecture. It's quite monumental. It's quite, it's quite imposing. And when you see some of the castles and other buildings of that period, you get that full feel of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. You can see it. It's quite different to what you experience elsewhere. So they're very proud of their Austro-Hungarian background, the people that live in Transylvania. But you see, another problem is, of course, is that even looking at modern films, they always cast people that live in Transylvania as dressed in 19th century, 18th century peasants. You see them dressed in clothing that people haven't worn for over 100 years. And you see that in modern day films. You think, what kind of a moron wrote the script of this movie? But again, the same problem.
They wear Nike trainers just like anyone else.
I tell you what, it really does. It really annoys me. I mean, Ireland, for example, the amount of Americans I met who thought that the Irish wore trousers that weren't quite long enough to reach their shoes and walked around with shillelagh and ridiculously small pork pie hat on their heads.
The Irish love their designer clothes.
I went to an Irish country fair and in America, and it was like a horror theme park. It was absolutely ghastly. It was completely...
They've got no idea, have they?
They had
No idea of Europe.
The only thing they had in common with Ireland is that they had an Irish surname, but the people there did not understand what Irish history was all about. And so you had this idea, this theme park where everyone dresses in 18th and 19th century clothing. And the same problem exists with Romania. The Romanians dress like everybody else, wear modern clothing. There are some peasants there still. The peasantry is still quite strong. People that live a very simple life. And you do see people travelling around on horse and cart. And, of course, then you have the gypsies. They still live in if you like, in a traditional life environment to what they used to live. And so all that gets welded to the rest of the country, and all of a sudden everybody's living in the 18th or 19th centuries. It's just ridiculous. I find it infuriating because it's abusing history, and it's the same with the paranormal. And this is why I get so wound up when I look at some newspaper reports, when I look at some of the videos that exist on YouTube, the utter, excuse my French, I will use this word once, the utter crap that I see on YouTube, you know, where they're making contact with demons. Everything's a demon. And where they claim it to be EVP, and it's just a on the tape recorder. That's a demonic voice talking to me. I think, oh, my God, what is wrong with you people? And the trouble is people soak this crap up. They soak it up and they believe this is what it's all about. And they also believe that good ghost detection, good paranormal investigation utilizes all of the latest modern techniques and equipment. Yes and no. Yes and no. I was very skeptical about the ghost box until
you don't really need all this equipment. You just need yourself. Your gut instinct will tell you more or less everything.
Was very, very useful. Very, very good. I mean, I went to a place called Sparrows Pond in the village of Gosfield, not far from where I live, and the lake there was constructed in the 18th century, 19th century, maybe a bit earlier, by Irish navvies. These poor people were brought over to Britain, and they travelled the country. They helped build Britain's railways and some of the major
roads
buildings.
And everything, yeah.
And it's built by sheer labour, brute strength. And many of these poor people died doing this. And their women came with them, their women, their children. And so they followed as camps from one location to another. And when I was standing there with the ghost box, I'm picking up lots of Irish people talking to me. And the weirdest part, of course, was at the end, when a voice, an English voice, said on the ghost box, "You've got visitors." And just as you said, and then this lady said, "Yes, that be true, that be true." And just as they finished that, a group of kids turned up.
Oh.
Wow.
They actually alerted me to the fact that there were visitors. They knew my name as well. And sometimes when I go back to some places, they say, "Yes, we know you." And when I'm listening to this, I find it absolutely fascinating. And so that as a working as a resource tool is very, very good. But again, using the ghost box, it does make a lot of noisy background sounds, and that irritates a lot of people. But there's no other way of getting around it. The Ovilus I found interesting, but it doesn't give you accents. It doesn't give you the natural fluency of speech that you get with a ghost box. And so I'm kind of drawn in between the Ovilus and the ghost box at the moment. I think the ghost box...
Chris, Mark's got ghost box, and he actually took it well underground into the Cave of Winds in Colorado to see if he could pick anything up.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. When you're saying ghost box, I want to make sure we're talking about the same equipment. Is this the device that scans the radio frequencies at a high rate?
PBS7. And all it is, it's just all it is, and you could do this with any transistor. Mm-hmm. All you need to do is to alter the scan. Instead of just scanning to the next station, it just goes on free scan. So it's constantly spinning around all the time.
The only problem... I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The only problem I've had with that device, and I rarely use it, is only because if you're in any type of metropolitan area, you're going to pick up all sorts of regular radio broadcasts with it. Where I've only used it in locations where I'm extremely remote and there isn't any radios nearby. Or a few months back, I used it going down inside some caverns where I was 250 feet beneath solid rock. And there's no possibility of radio signals going down there. And we did happen to catch some information. So I heard them use these ghost boxes in some of these shows, and I can hear like music in the background of radio stations as they're quickly scanning by.
Let me explain through experience of using it. I discovered, and when I listened to some of my videos, if you look at the one of the ghostly priest who refused to die, you'll listen to the fact that it starts off very briefly as a normal radio transmission, and then suddenly it changes. It seems to absorb that sound and reconstruct it into something completely different. And you notice that, and I've certainly noticed that as well. Now, if I was just picking up music or tracks of normal radio transmission, I agree. That in itself is nonsense. But it's using white noise. It's using sound to reconstruct, because they've got no sound boxes, so they're reconstructing sound in the way that they would have spoken in their lifetime. And if they're not doing that, it's something very close to it. And so I discovered that a lot of what I'm picking up, like, for example, in the middle of Essex, I'm picking up Irish people talking to me. I can even tell that their accents are from Dublin or from elsewhere in the country. Why would I be picking up all these Irish accents in the middle of Essex? What radio program is there? And, of course, I do my research, and there are no programs which are entirely based upon people talking with an Irish accent at that period of time. So they're actually utilizing that sound, and they're converting it into words and sounds which are associated to themselves. Now, the one thing about the paranormal, I'm not here to convince people. If people want to be led blindly to believe that it's a load of rubbish, it's just random radio transmissions, nothing else, and it's best to ignore it, that's entirely up to them. But I'm actually in the business of actually studying the paranormal, trying to understand it, trying to look for certain frequencies of activity and behavior that I can relate to in future investigations. Because the first golden rule of the paranormal is that there is no rule. But there are certain pointers that I picked up, familiar points which reoccur and repeat themselves. And I look for these little patterns, little tiny patterns of behavior, which can tell me a great deal about what I may or may not experience. But I don't think a lot of people really look at that aspect of it. And I'm talking about the skeptics. They just blindly write it off as radio transmissions. You know, it's like the light inside the forest. Oh, everybody knows. Any fool can tell you it's a car. You know, how many cars you see in the middle of the forest with one light that goes orange and red? You don't. So you look for...
Well, that would be very unusual, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, when I go to the forest, I've actually got a Google map. I'm actually going to look to see where the roads are, to correlate the position of the roads and vehicles. But again, where the circle is, it is coming towards the edge of the forest, but the tree line is thick enough to prohibit, especially in summer, to prohibit any opportunity for light to enter into the forest from outside. So that is something I'm going to look at. I'm going to do a survey of the site. I always do surveys to work out exactly what I'm likely to expect, how I can, if it's explainable, I will write it off. I will ignore it. But if it's not explainable, then I will share it. That's all I can do. At the end of the day, it's up to the individual themselves to make their own minds up as to whether or not they believe it to be real or not. And if they don't believe it to be real, well, that's fine. I don't care. The one thing that does annoy me is because of what I'm sharing, or therefore I must be prone to be insulted by these morons, the ones that go on the attack and accuse you of rigging the equipment to create and fabricate this kind of... And I think, why? What is the point of that? If I wanted to do that, let me tell you this now. If I wanted to cheat, I would have the #1 show on YouTube. I know how to fabricate. I know exactly how to do it. I know all the things that are necessary to do this, but I don't, because people that look at my work can see that I'm being open and honest with what I'm experiencing and sharing. But, you know, cheating is easy. Doing it the right way is hard. It is a struggle. I find it a struggle financially because I'm not hitting the figures that I want to because I'm trying to be honest. And that, for some people, is an issue. And that's the only way I can do it. And so when I go to the forest, if there's anything there which I think is explainable, I will explain it.
Yeah.
You know? Well, no, where's the point of cheating if you're there? I'm there from a more scientific and explorer aspect. I'm there on a spiritual level to delve into this activity. And I think this activity is so wonderful and so beautiful that I want to share it. So why bother? Why bother?
Yeah.
It's pointless, doesn't it?
Well,
It is pointless.
For me as a researcher, one of the things that you want to look into is one of the things I'm very fascinated in are these lights. And these lights, I think sometimes are misrepresented as UFOs, but they have been recorded in the woods. They've been recorded not only in those woods, other woods. I had a good friend of mine in Ohio who he's actually a cryptid researcher, a Bigfoot researcher, and he doesn't deal with the paranormal, but he got on video while he does his own YouTube show and he's talking into the camera, but right behind him, here comes one of these lights about 20 feet off the ground, strolling in and out of the trees, behind some, in front of others, so you could tell it's not a car, it's not an insect, it's if I had to guess on the size, it was about the size of a football. And weaving in and out of the trees right over his head and past him. And he told me about another time where one floated right up to his face and hovered there for a few moments before he tried to reach his camera to take a picture of it, and it vanished. And he felt like an intelligence coming from it. So, I look at, what are we really dealing with? Is it spiritual? I don't think so. I'm inclined to believe, and as crazy it might seem to some people, I'm inclined to believe that, and this is what I'm thinking of in terms of Hoya Baciu Forest, that this energy might well be some kind of latent life form of alien origin. It might be a sentient intelligence that shields itself away from mainstream human activity. One thing I haven't shared with you, when I flew over to Ohio the first time, we went across, we were heading towards Newfoundland, and I could see lights literally zipping out of the sea, going literally up and down from the heavens to the ground vertically in a fairly frequent basis. And they were some distance away, but they were viewable. And I'm sat there for about 5 minutes watching these lights shoot out of the sea off the coast of Newfoundland, which is pretty isolated. It's a long way away from human habitation. And I called one of the stewards over. It was an American Airlines flight, and he came. He was quite a decent guy. He came over, and I was chatting to him about it, and asked him if he'd seen any odd lights out there. And he said that he had on past occasions. And he sat there with me, and we both looked out the window, and we could see these lights coming out of the sea, going up and down like a highway. And I'm wondering if what we are seeing there in this particular case is the form that they take when they're, if you like, let's face it, the spherical form is probably the best shape, isn't it, to be able to move around in any environment. And I'm wondering if it is an intelligent life form from another galaxy. I mean, I certainly don't think for one moment that we are the only, and I use that word lightly, intelligent life form in the universe. I'm pretty damn sure that there are people or creatures or whatever you want to call them. I'm sure that we are being observed. We are being looked at. That we might well be a petri dish to them. They may well be just watching our development and seeing how we progress. And there's certainly a number of famous stories. Now, they're probably apocryphal, but there's one story where I believe in the late 80s, Britain and Russia came very, very close, and America, very close to triggering World War III, and that a Russian attempted to launch missiles. I can't believe anyone would be that incredibly stupid, but let's just say that he did.
But certainly he wasn't able to prepare a launch because all of the control panel equipment malfunctioned. And a similar thing occurred in Britain and in the United States. So they weren't able to bring it up to the level where they were, if they decided to be able to launch missiles to each other. And perhaps there is a protective guardian spirit. Perhaps in the forests at Hoyt Bachu is an intelligent life form which that exists there through probably as a result of what was observed in the 60s, probably observing people and our lifestyles from a safe distance to see what we do. I certainly don't think that they would intermingle within the mainstream population, but I think, as I saw in the case of Greenland, Newfoundland rather, that there are intelligent life forms that keep well enough away from us, but close enough to observe us. And I'm wondering if there is something that exists like that in the forest.
For me, one of the things that I've been researching, and I believe is connected with this type of activity, just because we come across something that we think might be sentient and non-human, doesn't automatically mean it's from another planet. I really think that we're dealing.
No, that's true.
That's dealing with a lot of intelligences and creatures. Some as intelligent as us, even, that we're sharing the planet with, but for whatever reason, our societal conditioning, makes us dismiss these stories as just simply fairy stories. And that's where it comes from the Celtic Shay and fairy lore, Icelandic elves, Middle Eastern jinn. They all seem to have a lot of the same characteristics. And even when you're dealing with these lights in the woods, I've heard stories of these lights being around. You can see them around UFOs. You can see them around cryptid-like creatures like a Bigfoot, or even the small people, the little people. And there's even theories that maybe that they're able to change form, and maybe that's what some of these lights represent. In North Carolina, here in America, there's the Brown Mountains, and they're famous for these lights. They call them the Brown Mountain Lights. And people go out every night to go and watch these lights come out of nowhere, out of the forest, up in the mountains, float around in the trees.
Now, I know there's one case which was examined by scientists, and it was proven to be an optical illusion. And in fact, it was the headlights of cars in the far, far distance, which, allowing for local environmental conditions, created a phenomena where people thought that they were seeing these alien lights. I don't know, but I mean, it could well be an earthbound energy, or it could be a spacebound energy. We will never know. And again, just taking it one stage further, this existence that we lead on this life could be part of that experience. Perhaps these creatures that we observe to be aliens are really us in our true form.
There is that possibility. I just believe the world is much more wonderfully strange than we realize, and what we look at sometimes as paranormal really is just normal that we haven't figured out yet. This
is the problem, and again, coming back to the points I was raising earlier about the people that go great distances to confect activity on videos, particularly on YouTube, and also the newspapers, and they are sharing which quite frankly mostly is easily dismissed. But the trouble is that people are drawing a correlation between that and what we are actually doing, as though we're a bunch of fools rampaging wildly, blindly out there, looking for something that really has been created by somebody else for a laugh. And this is something that concerns me deeply, because I take the subject very seriously, and it's compounded to a degree by TV, and particularly reality TV programs that are, if you like, and I don't think that the majority of these do it dishonestly, purposefully. I think that them and the production companies they work for are under tremendous pressure to come up with results between ad breaks, to keep people sat through the ad breaks to watch the program, because without advertising revenues, there's no program. And so you always get this heightened state of awareness just before the ad break, the cliffhanger. And you sit there and you wait until it gets to the next stage, and either mostly deflates into nothing, or something amazing happens, which quite frankly is questionable activity. And that is the biggest problem I have, because I think that paranormal television could be so much different if they adapted, if they slipped away from reality TV format, which can be applied to literally anything, and actually examined these situations a little bit more in depth through examination, and also as they used to do in the old days, actually interviewing people who have experienced it, and in some cases people that have actually captured it, and tying all these facts together, the history and everything else, to actually bring out a much broader spectrum of what is actually happening there. And you don't get that. You just don't get that. You just get a bunch of guys that go into a place and they act it all out, act tough, act the macho man or whatever they're going to do, but they do it in a particular style that adds hyped excitement to the whole program. And at the end of it, it's like eating the contents of a packet of cornflakes. There's absolutely no nutrition in the whole program. At the end of it, there's nothing. And you sit there and you feel deflated by what you've seen, because some of what you've seen may well be questionable. And I think the worst example, and I actually made a video on this, was Most Haunted and the Wordsworth Ghost, when the ghost quite clearly was a fellow cast member.
Oh, yeah.
Stuart. At Torreville. And I was...
Can't mistake that outline, can you?
But, the smart arse is that I'm the thing is, I'm very open and very perhaps too broadly spoken about how I feel about these things, because I think it's important for people to sit there and think about them rather than just soak it up and accept it. I'm very, very concerned that, okay, these programs, even Ghost Adventures, all of them, they have a warning label. This is for entertainment purposes only. In other words, whatever you see in this program should not be taken for real. This is a television program. And television programs should not be like that. They shouldn't. It's pointless. And reality TV is the cult of personality, which is the rule for most programs. I mean, the people that watch what I do because they like what I do. They like my presentation style. They like how I bring things together in my way, because it's my style and it's what I do. So I accept that. But to add a little bit more substance to it, and this is not what we're getting. We're getting this... an aberration of truth, and it saddens me, because these programs should be an education, not just for entertainment. They should be there to be viewed and enjoyed. And we were talking about ghost lights very quickly. I did an investigation in 2015 at RAF Colby Grange, which is a former air traffic control tower, or as it was known during the wartime, a watchtower. And we picked up a little bit of activity while we were there. But the best part was when we actually left. I felt compelled to take photographs in the dark of the building. Now, what I did, I set my camera to take 2 photographs simultaneously, one with flash and one without. And in the photographs that did not have flash, there was a bright light observed entering the building. And this bright light split into 2 bright lights. I think one was orange and one was red. And then in the last frame, these lights appeared in the window, and you could quite clearly see they were 2 human heads. Could this have been, coming back to the argument, the discussion that we had earlier, could these have been what we have described loosely with inverted commas, these alien lights? Because I actually saw it and actually captured it on camera. And the building is also a place which is associated with ghost lights. And here I've got a full sequence of photographs showing these ghost lights. And I found it to be absolutely amazing. And I tell you, this is absolutely true. I shared these photographs for free with a local newspaper in Lincolnshire. If you have any paranormal photographs, please upload them, create an account, upload the photographs and share them on our website. Well, because it was Lincolnshire, I thought local Lincolnshire people would be really interested in seeing this. But you know what they did? They not only did they remove every single photograph I uploaded, they also blocked me.
What?
That's because you're not getting a full-bodied apparition to show them.
I was actually blocked, and I wrote to the newspaper. It was a polite message asking them why they've done it, and I was quite happy to discuss this matter with them. They would not answer me. And so I now tend to steer well clear of the press and the media, because they are a contamination. They really are. They contaminate. They don't help to educate and entertain. They contaminate. They contaminate it by the stories that they write around these events, and then the way they put their words together and they share this information. It looks like a joke. It looks like something that should be taken with a pinch of salt, rather than something that was genuine and seriously happened. And this is another problem I have. So it's very, very difficult when you're trying to share the truth, and you've literally got all the big guns lined up against you, whether it's on YouTube or whether it's on television or whether it's in the media, all lined up against you, creating an entirely different story, an entirely different aspect of understanding of the paranormal, turning something which is really a very serious study of a subject into something which is more akin to a joke. This is the problem. This is something that I'm trying to overcome. And I have to say that on YouTube, certainly in the last year, my subscriptions are certainly starting to shoot up a lot more. And people now that are coming to my site have, because I'm not getting, the more views you get, the more people will see your work, and the more subscribes you get. That's how it works. But because people it's not being exposed in the same way that some of the crap is being exposed. People are literally coming across my work by chance, and when they do find it, they're really pleased to be there. And people write to me and say, I've watched all your shows, I enjoy everything you do, I love everything, why can't you do this to a bigger audience? Well, the problem is people aren't, and I'm talking about people that are involved on the more commercial basis, perhaps, are not that interested, because it's not a quick fix to get viewers, is it?
Well, that's something we've routinely complained about, is what is considered paranormal television these days it's whatever the gimmick can be. It's not, they have to, amp up, especially in American television, they have to amp up the negative or demonic aspect. And we know, those of us who do ghost investigation, we know how boring it is. I've investigated 17 years. Do you know how often I've come across a negative entity? Almost never. And
they are rare.
They're so rare.
Well,
but
yeah,
you know what?
Literally anything that doesn't fit, it becomes a demonic energy. And of course, if you're going to claim anything to be demonic, that means that you believe in the Bible, you believe in angels, you believe in demons. And then, of course, when you look at the Bible, how old is the Bible? What, 2,000 years old or whatever? Maybe 4,000 years at tops. When you look at the Bible, it is a concept written by man for man. So what existed before the Bible? Well, of course, other religions, other faiths, other ideas. And that's what religion is. Religion is an idea. It's an idea that people take to. They take to an idea and believe in it. And when people start quoting things as being demonic, then they are talking complete and utter nonsense, because the reality of the human spirit is thus. There are, and you see demons in as real people, serial killers, they're demons. These are negative energies. When they die, they are going to be a negative spirit if they're there to annoy or interfere with people. They are your demons. Demons are bad people. But to actually quote them as demonic energy in the biblical sense, well, I think that's a complete aberration of truth. I mean, why don't you just call them something else from an earlier religious cult, or even before then, It is nonsense, and I really do question how people formulate their beliefs. I'm very highly critical of everything. I really do thoroughly dislike politics, and I certainly now, I believe in God, but what my concept of God is, and the God I believe in, is it the same God that everybody else believes in? Because the other gods that people believe in wants to kill everybody, wants to bomb their countries, wants to massacre their populations. That's not the God I believe in, so where is this concept of God? I think it's a life-affirming energy. I think that we can feel it within and around us, wherever we go, and it's the bread and butter of life. It's what binds everything together. Call it what you will. I'm using the term God in the simplistic sense, but there is something there. And when people start quoting biblical characters, well, you might as well quote characters from Disney films. It's about as relevant, in my opinion. And I'm not trying to knock anybody's religious belief. If people believe in certain things, that's fine. But in my mind, I question all of these things. Like I question all of politics. To me, it's just a construct that's used to control people, to get them to behave in a certain way. And I have real grave difficulties with it. It's not because I've got any disrespect for their religions. I haven't. I don't dislike somebody because because they're Christian or because they're Muslim or they're Jew or whatever the case may be. I dislike people for the ill intent that is drawn from those religious or political beliefs. That is my problem. That is the issue that I have with humanity. And so I keep an open mind. I really do. I've got a broad shoulders. I embrace everything. I look at everything and examine it. But I don't diss it because I hate it. I just can't see a relevancy when people claim things to be demonic energy, when these people that claim it's demonic don't even read the Bible.
Yep. Well, I'm with you there. I'm along the same lines as you. I mean, there are times I think, we should bring back the old Viking gods and Odin and Thor and start drinking from the skulls of our enemies.
You want to worship the moon. I want to go in the garden and worship, garden plants. I mean, again, whatever your belief is. I mean, if you believe your car is a god, yeah, go and worship it. I don't have a problem with any of that. But
Many do that.
But I do have a problem when people start using this as an excuse for whatever they claim it to be. And certainly by claiming a negative energy to be demonic. And these people don't actually read the Bible. I was brought up as a Christian. I understand the Bible. I used to read it in the New Testament. And because I've read it, I'm intelligent enough to realize whether or not I want to believe in it. And I don't believe in it. I believe these people existed in the New Testament. I believe, and I also believe that the tenets of civilization are written in the Bible, the 10 Commandments. But these are the rules of life that people adhere to. It's just a way of controlling people. You might as well worship the Roman gods or the Greek gods. It doesn't really matter what you believe in, as long as you don't harm other people and you don't misquote them. I mean, for example, as I say, coming back to demons, how many people really understand what demonic energy is? They don't. It just sounds good, doesn't it? Oh, on my tape recorder, I've got a demon talking to me. And people will sit there and, oh, wow. A demon. Has anyone actually videoed a demon? Have you seen any videos of demons? Have you? No, I haven't.
Well, there is my ex.
This is my frustration. It really is. And I used to video a lot inside churches. I love church. I really do love churches. I love these holy buildings, the history that's attached to them, the reverence and respect I have for these buildings. But, when I share my views with some, but not all, practicing Christians, just some, they look at me as though I'm worshipping Satan, as though I'm into black magic. I had one woman, she turned on me in a very scornful way. I do not believe in the workings of the devil like you do. And I'm thinking, well, what is your problem? Really? And I've had this inside church. I've had this inside churches. So I keep my opinions to myself. I don't discuss I actually sat down with a really nice guy. He was a practicing Christian, and we had a long conversation in the church. He said, what really annoys me, I believe in what I believe in, is because that's my right to believe in it. And I said, I'm totally 100% with you. He said, but what annoys me is when people tell me that I'm not allowed to believe in what I believe in. It's somehow wrong. It's somehow tainted. He said, and I'm not allowed to have an opinion. And I said, well, that's not just by believing in your own religion. That's life in general. Because when people try to put their will over other people's will on certain issues, it becomes you've lost the whole concept of democracy and democracy of opinion. And he said to me, I don't mind if people believe or don't believe in what I believe in. That's fine by me. He said, but it's when people suppress my right to express it. And he's absolutely right. I've got respect for people to believe in what they believe in. I don't disrespect anybody's beliefs, but I really do seriously question when belief becomes something which is either a misambiguation, if you like, in the sense of attributing every type of negative energy to demonic energy when they don't actually understand what demons are, and when they use that as an excuse to harm other people. And then I have serious issues. And I in my studies of churches, I tried to show where one particular religious view was used to impose their will upon another. An example being a church at Badley in Suffolk, which was a Catholic church that became, against its will, a Protestant church. And during the English Civil War, these extremists within these Protestant zealots, the iconoclasts, went to the church under military orders and wrecked the church. And the church has still got bullet holes to this day in the door of the church. The original door is there, and you can still find the bullet holes where they fired their lead shot.
I saw that one.
Yeah,
I saw that one, Chris. It was really good.
And that church, I can imagine. There was one church I went to that had this beautiful, absolutely beautiful salt glaze figurine that had been hidden away for centuries. It was one of the saints. It was 15th century in origin. It was an absolutely exquisite work of art, and that is a rarity to exist because it had been hidden from view. All the others were destroyed. They were smashed up because it was heretical in the eyes of the Protestant zealots. I did a bit some research on my family. My family, by origin, were Protestant priests. And I believe there's an account somewhere exists where one of my family members actually took it out upon another church because it was full of what he described as papal nonsense. I mean, what right has he got to say what they've got in their church is nonsense, And all this exquisite works of art was completely destroyed, ripped out of history. And just these odd relics exist to this day. When you go into a church in England, a medieval church, you see these empty niches. These niches were once occupied by works of art, these beautiful statues of the saints. They've all gone. And what a tragedy, what a loss it is, because it's part of our history, it's part of our culture.
It's a heritage, isn't it?
Yeah, and these are things that I like to reference when I've actually carried out visits or investigations inside churches, because I think it's all relevant. I think it's something that we should all learn from. But the problem is, of course, we don't learn from the past, and we allow our own inbound bigotries to continue. And this is part and parcel why there is so much conflict in the world today.
See, I'm one of those really strange people who are still upset about what happened with the Library of Alexandria. Can you imagine where we'd be if that had never been destroyed?
With you, I've been meaning to return that book. I will do.
There's so much. There's so much history, wonderful history. And even taking this back to Paveglia and Venice and all the history. Paveglia. I'm sorry, stupido Americano. There's so much wonderful history out there, and I think this is true of many real serious paranormal investigators, is that it's not just the the going out and finding ghosts and spirits and trying to prove that's not all why we do this, because let's face it, these ancient locations, these locations that are so full of history, it's the history itself that really draws me to these places. You know, it's one thing to look around for ghosts, but it's another thing to absorb, you know, especially the older locations like in Venice. You know, goes back hundreds of years, couple thousand years almost, and all the history that happened. The
410 AD, 410 AD, 410. I think Venice was founded. Yeah.
You know, so you're dealing with architecture, your history, the culture, people who grew up there, things that happened over the years. Any of these locations, even here in America where nothing is really that old, but I have locations here going back 100, 150 years. And during times, I'm currently living in Colorado. I'm surrounded by the Old West. And the one thing that's really permeated out here in the culture is the mines, the miners. They flooded out here looking for gold. You see all these old abandoned ruins of these old mines everywhere in the state. I'm going to be investigating next weekend. I'm going to be investigating an old 1800s gold mine that's supposed to be haunted. And it's not just the fact that it's haunted that's dragging me there, because it's also the history, the guys who who toiled there, the people who died there. Their stories, you know, need to be told, so they're not forgotten.
This is it. This because what you've also got to appreciate, and it people say to me, "Oh, you're so lucky, you've got all that history." But you know, when I look at America, you've got it's not just a history of the European settlers, but it goes back much further with the Native Americans, the Indians, whichever one you want to call these people. They have a fantastic history, and their burial grounds and their holy sites, and you can still feel the energy there. You know, I discovered an ancient Indian burial ground that had been used by it angers me to think about it to this day. It's been used as an unofficial garbage dump, and there was this what used to be an island sat in a marsh, and I could see why it became their burial ground. It was in the most beautiful location that had since been destroyed. The marsh had been drained, and the soil around it had been filled with garbage. But I could still see and feel that beauty and respect that, and understood why they did these things. And I think America has got a wonderful history that goes back a long, long way. But you've got to look beyond the European as a starting point and go back into Native American history. And it is simply wonderful. It really is. And even with more recent history in America, people say, I find it just as interesting if I'm exploring an old ghost town as I would if I went into a building that was created in the 11th century. To me, it matters not. It's what's attached to it. It's the history. It's the vibes that you feel. You know, when I go into an ancient site or building for the first time, it's the most wonderful experience for me, because I only feel it that one occasion, on that one moment in time. I go in there, and for that moment it hits me, and it's strong and it's overpowering, and I can feel that. I felt that with Pavelia when I wandered around the back, not so much at the front, but at the back. But you know, I'm hoping that when I go to the forest in Hoyabachu, I'm going to feel that energy when I walk in there. It's going to grip me. It's going to embrace me, and that to me means just as much as any ancient building or relatively modern abandoned site. You see, when you look at trees, like with the Native Americans, the forest is a cathedral of worship, wasn't it? And when you walk into somebody's forest, especially with the giant sequoias which they worshipped, and you wander amongst those trees, you feel like you're in a natural cathedral, and you can really embrace that energy, that feeling around you. These are wonderful places. They really are. But people can't see beyond what they can visually see. They cannot feel, or they cannot allow themselves, should we say, rather, to draw into that hidden energy which pervades these places, you know? Amazing. I could spend my entire life investigating America, and yet I would never touch half of the ancient sites that do exist there.
And
that's true.
And those are some of the sites that, like at the Hayabachu, let's face it, it's a natural forest. It's a natural area. There's no buildings. It's not an old building that you're investigating. It's something that's out in nature, and there are these hot spots of what I call high strangeness all over. We have several that I know, many in America, also around the world, that for whatever reason, these locations have this type of strange activity, and that really attracts me. I'm sorry, Irene, I think you were about to ask a question, and I stepped on you.
I was just going to ask Chris, well, you more or less got onto it, actually. What I was going to say was he's done now the island, he's going to do the forest, and he does want to do many, many more places like this around the world. Which are the ones that he's most interested in doing next after the forest?
That is a very good question, because I've been to Ireland on quite a number of occasions.
Yeah.
And Leap Castle, I've been there, I've done that. That's also one of the, if you like, most haunted castles in the world, allegedly. It's as a compass point, I suppose. Where would I go next? Well, Eastern Europe appeals to me a lot, because a lot of the old world is still very much preserved there. And Greece, for example, if you go there, some of the ancient sites that still exist there that go back thousands of years. But I think that most energy, spiritual energy that you feel on haunted locations is more contemporary. It's within the last 200 or 300 years where it seems to be at its strongest.
Yeah.
And so I at the moment, I haven't yet really decided where I would like to go to next, but I'm drawing up a list of what's doable and what's not doable. I mean, there are some places in South America I would love to go to. I'd love to go to one of the Incan temples, for example, but whether I could be able to afford to go there and film it, that is another question entirely. It's all down to whatever I can raise in terms of finance to allow me to do that. But yeah, there's a number of other places for sure that I would like to go to. There's a cave in Ireland where thousands of Irish people were slaughtered within the caves by Danes. I would love to go there and explore that. Don't ask me where it is. I can't think of the place off the top of my head. It's rather late at night for me here. But it's one of those places I would love to get to. But the biggest problem is, and it is an issue for many of us, and talking to Mark Painter, the guy who joined me on my jaunt over to Venice, is that the cost, particularly in America, of actually being allowed to investigate some of these reputedly haunted sites, the cost is prohibitive. They want hundreds of dollars just to let you go into these buildings to explore them. You know, where can people draw? Not many people can afford to do that as individuals. I certainly would not want to do it as a group. I'm not interested in group investigations because of noise contamination and all kinds of other problems that can occur. I love to go to places with perhaps no more than 4 people and explore them. One place I would love to go to, and it's very much more recent, I think it dates to 1936, that's Queen Mary at Long Beach.
I've been on the Queen Mary when I was a child, a long time ago, because I grew up in California. And yes, that ship, I would love to go there now as an adult and look into what goes on there. But, you know, at the same time, they have a bad reputation because they were caught on a television show faking things for the television show. Some people on the crew.
I absolutely no doubt. And it's coming back to the point I made to you earlier about commercial pressures to come up with results. You know, with what I do, nobody's putting me under pressure to come up with results, are they? No one's saying to me, if you don't get blah, blah, blah by blah, 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 then we're going to drop the program. I don't have that kind of pressure. I mean, I've been interviewed twice by media companies based in New York with they wanted to the usual stories I get. We're going to make you a star. You're going to have your own television series. But I have to explain to them and be honest that it would have to be outside the reality TV format. And that frightens a lot of companies, producers particularly, because they're frightened to step outside of that remit of the reality TV formula. because they're frightened that it won't get the viewers and the viewings, which pays for the advertising, which pays their wages, and so on and so forth. I would disagree with that. I think it's doable. I really do believe it's doable. But until someone comes up to me and says, oh, yes, Chris, we like the idea of what you're proposing. Let's go with it. And then they can go to the networks and the networks say, yeah, brilliant idea. Let's go with it. But instead, it's always going to be another reality TV format, and it's not doable, not in my eyes, because I know what the pitfalls are. If they gave me a free rein to do what I could do, I mean, everything that you see that I produce is paid for out of my meager budget and what I can afford to do. Everything, the editing, the filming, the production, the presentation, everything is done by me. There is nobody else. I don't get no huge cash inflows from other sources. I get a modest and I've got a small band of supporters who I'm incredibly grateful to on Patreon, who support me, and that money helps towards buying equipment and allow me to travel a little bit further afield. But if a commercial company would give me that opportunity, I would give them something far, far better and much bigger than what you see at the moment. I'm not going to discuss any more further details on that, but I can tell you that what I've got in mind would be absolutely amazing. It would be compelling television. And if they gave me that opportunity to do that, I would be able to fulfill that obligation. But unfortunately, it's like everything else. Until someone says to me, you know, someone who's got the connections and the power to do it says, yes, we love the idea. I'm really going to try and sell that idea and get you onto that platform. Then I know I could do it. And that is the real struggle at the moment. And I'm certainly not interested in just doing reality TV, because I think it's a waste of time, because for the reasons that I've already explained, it's not going to produce the kind of results that I think people really want.
And, you know, having my own experience with the current television age, and that's the part of the problem, is these producers making these shows don't care. They don't care about the subject. They care about making money.
Well, I think in truthfulness, look, I mean, I'm not critical of the production companies. I'm not critical of the networks. I'm just critical of the fact that people aren't willing to, you know, poke their head above the parapets. They're not prepared to raise their head and say, let's try something different, because they're frightened, because it's all tied in under a lot of economic pressure to come up with a particular result. They have a formula which they think works, but it may work in the short term. But we're looking at an idea that dates back, to the late 90s? It's history. It's so, reality TV and the paranormal is so out of date. It needs refreshed. It needs a whole new impetus, a whole new an overview, an overhaul. With the right production crew and the right locations, I know I could produce something much, much better. Absolutely, 100%. I'm convinced in that. And the thing about whatever you do in life, you have to believe in yourself. If you lose that faith, you're not going to achieve anything. And I really do believe in myself. And I know that it is achievable and it is doable. But unfortunately, until someone is prepared to make that bold change, to move in a totally different direction, it ain't going to happen. And what's going to happen eventually, and it's already starting to happen, let's be honest, these TV programs aren't getting the viewers they used to have years ago. People are, in general, a lot of serious paranormal investigators or believers or followers are starting to turn away from it. They're looking at alternatives. So I get these people, they come to me. I'm talking about people that are seriously interested in history, seriously interested in the paranormal, not people that are out for a quick fix. People are out for a quick fix. They have the attention span of about 10 minutes. After that, it's gone. It's all short-term stuff. And you'll notice they keep coming out with different shows, the same format, but different people each time.
Ghost Brothers.
All the same formula.
Yep.
Well, Ghost Brothers, yeah, again. Okay, I like the idea. Let's be honest, most of these programs that we've seen are all white people. Let's have a group of black people investigating the paranormal. I think it's a great idea.
Well, you know what? I love the guys on the show, and they're a lot of fun to watch. But you're right; it's the same tired formula as every other darn show out there. And it's not the show doing anything different; is they just mix up the cast a little bit. And there you go, and they're not even really. I'm sorry, guys, but you're not even doing proper investigation. They literally took these three guys, handed them some cameras, and go ghost hunt. No training, no nothing. These guys have never ghost hunted before in their life, and so these shows.
Yeah, I mean, I find it enjoyable because I find not the what they're actually investigating. I find the people enjoyable. Yeah. I find them quite comical.
They're funny, aren't they?
Yeah, it's about character rather than substance. And they're three very nice.
At the end of the day, it's still the same MO, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, every show follows the same line.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to.
And if
change.
you can squeal, it helps.
I'm hoping that when I go to Hoibachu and the week that I'm there, I'm also investigating the ruins of a castle. When I use the word castle, I use the term lightly because a lot of these buildings are just fortified manor houses, with enclosed courtyards. I'm going to a building which would date to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which is in ruins. And it's a shame because it was a very beautiful building before the communists took over. And I'm hoping to shoot there as well. But what I'm going to do, rather than sort of chopping up and having one program here, one program there, I'm going to make the entire shoot of a week into one program.
Oh, really? That would be wonderful.
So and in between that, I'm hoping to get interviews with some local people about how they feel about the legends. I visit a few buildings which have allegedly which are allegedly haunted by particular phenomena, and report on that as well, and also show a little bit of the architectural and historical background to Cluj, where I'm going. So I'm hoping to embrace all of that and produce 2 night investigations as well in one program.
Chris, on that. Sorry, Mark.
Go ahead.
On that, we've come to a perfect end, haven't we, Mark?
Yes. We have indeed. It's mostly here. It's quite late.
Yes. Yeah. We Well, Chris, thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's wonderful talking with you as usual. Just once again for the Pavelia.
Hey!
Sorry, Pavelia. For the Pavelia investigation, now that documentary is complete. Where can people see that?
Well, if they go to my page on YouTube, which is Haunted Earth Films and TV, or if they just type in Haunted Earth, people find me fairly quickly. If they go on there, Pavelia is split into 2 parts, part 1 and 2. The day investigation, the wander around the site, lasts for about an hour, and then we have the night investigation, which I think is just under an hour. And just very, very quickly, one piece of equipment I'm utilizing a lot now is a GoPro on a gimbal, because I used that on my day visit on Pavelia, and I generated some amazing effects with the camera, the angles, the shots. So I'd be using the same format to a degree when I go into the forest at Hoibachu.
I've been using my own GoPro as well in a lot of things. It really comes in handy, and it takes great pictures. So, well, that's excellent. Chris,
I've seen both those videos, and they are absolutely brilliant.
They are.
Well, just another thing, if anybody wants to support me, you can find me on Patreon as Chris Holton. If you can support me for as less as $5 a month, I'd be deeply appreciative, because every red cent helps. It gets me from A to B, and it allows me to be able to produce much better shows and from more interesting locations. And I certainly feel that Hoibachu Forest and Cluj-Napoca and some of those the buildings and castles that exist there are certainly going to make it a really good show.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for coming on. And before we leave, Irene, have a wonderful trip in Italy.
Yeah, I will. And Italia, yeah.
Italia.
And
have a great time
on the Amalfitana coast.
Well, I love Italy, and I know you do. It's a beautiful country. It's got some wonderful sights, and it has a fantastic history. So yeah, have a great time while you're there. I'm pretty sure where I'm going is going to be pretty cool, and it's going to be hot there. I should say it's going to be in the in terms of Fahrenheit. The average temperature there this time of year is 97 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yikes.
well, and also we've got to apologise for any snoring going on in the background.
Yeah, that was not ghosts in the background. That was Gertie, the mascot for Paranormal UK Radio's network.
Oh, right.
Yes, snoring as usual. Well, everybody, thank you again for listening. We'll catch you next time, and have a wonderful evening. Irene and Chris, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night.